Coming up within the half hour. Israel and Iran continue strikes as U.S. says plans for talks with Tehran remains fluid. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen calls on all parties of the Middle East conflict to go to the negotiating table and end the hostilities. Pakistan's Prime Minister volunteers his country as a venue for peace talks between Iran and the United States. Welcome everyone. As we begin the program, I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We begin in the Middle East, where Israel and Iran have continued to trade strikes as U.S. plans for talks with Tehran remains fluid. The Israeli military says that it completed a wave of attacks across Lebanon, targeting fuel stations allegedly being used by Hezbollah. Defense Minister Israel Katz says Israeli troops will take control of a large swathe of southern Lebanon as part of the campaign against Hezbollah. The latest escalation began after Iran-backed Hezbollah fired rockets into northern Israel in retaliation for the killing of Iran's supreme leader and the frequent Israeli attacks on Lebanon despite the November 2024 ceasefire. Meanwhile, one civilian contractor has been killed in an Iranian attack in Bahrain. The United Arab Emirates Ministry of Defense confirmed that the contractor, a Moroccan national, was working for the United Arab Emirates Armed Forces. 5 members of the UAE Defense Ministry were also injured in the attack. The incident comes as the US and Israel have maintained airstrikes on Iran since February 28, killing so far over 1,340 people, including then Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has called on all parties of the Middle East conflict to sit down at the negotiation table and end the hostilities. She says the situation is critical for the energy supplies worldwide as everyone feels the knock-on effects on gas and oil prices. At a joint press conference with the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in Canberra on Monday, she said she did not completely exclude the possibility of some European nations joining hands with the United States in reopening the Strait of Hormuz blocked by Iran in response to the attacks on its territory. She describes the passage closure as unacceptable and urged Tehran to adhere to the freedom of navigation principle. She reiterates that leaders in the European Union have been very clear that when the hostilities end, they could envisage an operation, a mission, adding that, of course, it's not for her to judge on their decision to provide the necessary capabilities in the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, the Australian Prime Minister dodged the question on whether Canberra considers a maritime operation in the region, stressing that Australia is already contributing to the Gulf nations through military aid.
I'm deeply concerned about the conflict. Iran has to cease immediately its threats, laying of mines, drones and missile attacks and other attempts to block the strait to commercial shipping. The recent attacks by Iran on unarmed commercial vessels in the Gulf, attacks on civilian infrastructure, including oil and gas installations, and the de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz by Iranian forces is unacceptable and must be condemned. I also want to emphasize that freedom of navigation is a fundamental principle of international law. We will come back to these issues and their structural consequences at the Parliament this afternoon. I am very happy that today we agreed to step up our cooperation with 4 major projects. They cover production of rare earth, lithium and tungsten. And we are building on our work with allies towards a buyers club, and we are building on the critical raw materials partnership we launched 2 years ago. And we will apply the same logic to security, and this is my 4th and final point. The launch of our security and defense partnership. Europe and Australia share a responsibility beyond our borders. We know that Europe's security and Indo-Pacific stability are not separate conversations. A crisis in the Indo-Pacific would cripple global trade, directly hitting European industries and growth. So we have resolutely decided to step up cooperation on defense industry, counterterrorism, space, and maritime security. And we are joining forces to fight back against hybrid threats to our democracies. Because we are both confronted with disinformation and wider attempts to erode public trust. Leaders in the European Union have been very clear that when the hostilities end, they could envisage an operation, a mission. But of course, it is not for me to judge on their decision to provide the necessary capabilities in the Strait of Hormuz.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen staying with that press conference. Australia and the European Union have agreed a sweeping free trade deal amid global uncertainty after 8 years of negotiations. The deal, described as a mutual win-win by Australia's Prime Minister and the visiting European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, was signed in Canberra and worth about 10 billion Australian dollars. Ms. von der Leyen also described the agreement as having a focus on collective resilience in a world that is deeply changing. Moreover, the two sides agreed to increase cooperation on defense and critical minerals, removing almost all tariffs on trade. European car makers have welcomed the deal, but farmers in both Europe and Australia were unhappy at export quotas agreed for Australian beef and lamb. In the meantime, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has volunteered his country as a venue for peace talks between Iran and the United States. In his words, subject to concurrence by the US and Iran, Pakistan stands ready and honored to be the host to facilitate meaningful and conclusive talks for a comprehensive settlement of the ongoing conflict. However, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi says he has had a phone call with US President Donald Trump in which the pair had a useful exchange on views on the situation in West Asia. Mr. Modi says he and Mr. Trump have agreed to keep in touch regarding efforts towards peace and stability. He stressed that ensuring the Strait of Hormuz remains open, secure and accessible is essential for the whole world. In the United States, airports are experiencing TSA staffing shortages, a lack of funding and security concerns in the midst of the US and Israel conflict with Iran. Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird has more on this.
David Orichenna, aviation expert, consultant in the aviation industry, we thank you so much for being available as we are in very interesting times here in the United States as it relates to airports, aviation, airport security. If you could give us a little insight into the actual climate right now. We hear of all types of delayed flights, even canceled flights. Many people are deciding not to fly right now because of the TSA challenges, specifically around the partial government shutdown and funding to fund that. We also hear there's, major reduction in force because people are deciding just to quit their jobs. Tell us what is actually right now happening in the United States.
Sure. So one thing, of course, aviation is impacted by many factors. We just had a large storm come through the United States early last week. And of course, that impacted flights all over. And then there's a ripple effect because as flights are canceled or delayed, then people then have to get rebooked on new flights. But then that creates a new problem because then those flights are filled up. And then it's hard to work through the backlog of passengers trying to get to their final destinations. Now with a further complication is with the current TSA employees not being paid, because in Congress they have not funded TSA and several other DHS agencies. That has impacted some of the crowding. And because what's happening is among the TSA employees, I would estimate 95%, 90 to 95% of the employees are designated essential personnel. What that means is normally during like snow days, when everybody else is off, because they're essential employees, they still have to report to work. Well, now they're in the unique situation of because they're essential employees, they have to show up to work even though they're not being paid.
Yeah, I mean that in and of itself is a great challenge that we know that we're facing here in the United States. Tell us a little bit more about, is it expected that we could see a funding for these TSA employees? Are we just seeing goodwill? What are some of the measures? Because obviously this could have an impact on security at airports.
Yeah, well, one thing I do want to say is I want to thank all of those TSA employees that are coming to work. It's not only that they're not getting paid, but they have to pay for daycare services. They have to pay to commute. And so they're literally paying in order to go to work, in order to perform their functions. And it's not only the screening function. You also have intelligence analysts that work for TSA and the operations center personnel. So they're monitoring the situation nationwide for all modes of transportation. And those TSA employees are also reporting to work. Those are employees you don't see in the public, like the screeners.
You mentioned intelligence. I'm glad you mentioned that because we also know there's a conflict between U.S., Iran, and Israel. And when you look at the conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran, you understand that there could be implications around security risk. And so obviously these intelligence individuals are monitoring the skies, are monitoring the aviation security. What kind of impact is this potentially having on the security, especially in these times where the U.S. has to be really focused around security?
Well, there's a couple different aspects. First of all, and probably most importantly, those operations continue to operate even though those employees are not being paid. And these are intelligence analysts that have very high security clearances that are plugged into the intelligence community. So if there's any information regarding threats to aviation, then it goes to this intelligence unit within TSA, and then they analyze that particular information to determine what the risk is and to work with operations and policy personnel in order to put out a security directive if necessary, if there's new information regarding a specific threat to aviation. So that function continues to operate. So that's the good news.
And David, before we close, it's very clear that there is some immediate need that needs to happen to really ensure the continued operations. As you mentioned, people are paying to go to work, and the potential security challenges as well, especially during the times that we're in. What is expected next? Are people going to expect the spring break holiday? The Easter holiday is coming very quickly. Can people expect to see continued long lines? Is there going to potentially be an end to this where people are going to start getting paid as TSA workers?
Yeah, well, the TSA is going to follow their standard operating procedures. They have staffing levels that they have to maintain. Now, what may happen at larger airports, they have the flexibility to shut down the number of checkpoints if they have less people showing up, but they still maintain the same level of security. Just takes more time to be processed, which creates a problem. But this is simply a matter of this could end immediately. And that's just a matter of Congress, who owns the purse strings in the United States, just saying, okay, we're going to fund it. And that.
Our Washington correspondent Maria Bird in that conversation there on security at U.S. airports. Of course, there's more from Maria. She actually joins us live now to speak more on several issues concerning airport safety and, of course, the fallout of the U.S.-Israel war on Iran. Maria, great to see you today.
See you as well.
Right, so let's first start, before we get into the fallout of the U.S.-Iran war, with the incident at the airport in New York yesterday. Any updates for us?
No updates as of yet. What we're really looking at is it's under investigation further. Obviously, this just brings another level of heightened security concerns. Obviously, the airport has been scaled down tremendously. Just looking at some of the security risks that are actually present in that region. And so at this time, there's nothing additional other than, which I'm assuming we will talk about a little bit later, are the ICE agents that are now deployed to that airport as well.
Crossover to the issues between the U.S., Israel, and Iran. We understand that immigration agents are being, are possibly being deployed to major airports across the country as part of the Trump administration's response to the ongoing disruptions in air travel. Any update on this?
Yes, well, we know that many of the major airports across the country have had ICE agents deployed to those. The president announced that over the weekend that he planned to have ICE agents, immigration agents, as you mentioned, deployed to various airports. Obviously, this means that local governments are very keen and focused on how this will impact the traveling season and impact their areas and their local airports. So you have airports, very large airports like Chicago, O'Hare Airport. Now Chicago has a smaller airport, which ICE agents are not deployed to. You have also one of the largest airports in the country, which is the Atlanta Airport, which that airport has seen ICE agents deployed there. LaGuardia Airport, as you have mentioned. So some of these very large airports, it's about 12 of them in all, that have had ICE agents deployed. So part of what we really have to understand is that these TSA agents that are there, that are understaffed, major shortages on availability of staff, even some have quit their jobs as a result of the many challenges. They're going to still be required to provide the very specific, like the screening checks. They will be the ones doing that. What is stated is that the ICE agents are there to provide support for some of those tasks that don't require the expertise or the training that TSA has been through. Those would be what they'll be providing support for. Now, what we have not yet gained clarity on is there's also a whole intelligence back office component to TSA, and that those ICE agents are going to be providing support there. But at this time, what we know is it's actually the presence on the ground in the actual airports.
And do you reckon that, immigrants traveling will, should be concerned about the presence of ICE agents at the airports?
You have mayors that have said that they are going to be keeping a close eye on these airports because they want to ensure that regardless of someone's immigration status, they do not feel threatened at the airport if they are traveling. And so that is going to be a major focal point in an area that is of concern and an area that they are focusing on in various cities throughout the country where ICE agents are present.
Right, and the airport, security issues, are regarding, of course, that war in the Middle East between Israel, U.S., and Iran, of course. Pakistan is offering itself as, a neutral ground for talks between all parties concerned. Just yesterday, the U.S. president said that it's pausing attacks on the Iranian power plants because talks are ongoing. Iran has denied this. Pakistan is offering itself. Do you see any negotiations going on, in the next couple of days, weeks even, perhaps?
As you know, the U.S. has had a presence in the Middle East for quite some time, going back to Iraq, going back to many other conflicts in the Middle East. And so the U.S. continues to have relationships across the Middle East. And as you mentioned, Iran has said that they are not necessarily in talks. The president has said that they are in communication with Tehran, which is why, as you mentioned, they have halted any further strikes on the power plant. And so I think that the president as he said before, the war could end soon. And so the question is whether or or not those in his administration, and also many congressional members that do have a voice in this area around foreign relations, have been able to talk to the president, and that they're looking to end the war sooner than expected. Because there's various areas that the president could claim victory in. Obviously, as we know, as it relates to the supreme leader and the government structure of Iran, that is still an area that Iran has been very clear to take a hold of. But as it relates to other factors that the president went into the conflicts with Israel on, the president could claim that he has done what he thought and what he planned to do. So I think at this time, what we're waiting on is, as you mentioned, with Pakistan, if he will be able to work with Pakistan to bring together some sort of a mutual agreement, as you mentioned, a ground that is of peace parties, and providing that level of support to being able to move this from a conflict to potentially an agreement.
Well, Maria, thanks again. Pleasure having you on the program. And still to come. The Philippines declares a state of national energy emergency in response to the Middle East conflict. That's in a moment. Welcome back. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has spoken to his Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi. In translated text from Chinese state media, he reportedly told Yi Iran is committed to a comprehensive ceasefire, not just a temporary one. He also explained that Hormuz is open to all and ships can pass safely, but countries currently at war are not being considered. The state media provided readout of the conversation and says that Mr. Yi's talking is always better than fighting, and urged for all parties to seize every opportunity and window of opportunity for peace and initiate the peace process as soon as possible. The Philippines has become the first country in the world to formally declare a state of national energy emergency in response to the Middle East conflict, and few nations are more exposed to the disruption to oil supplies. The energy minister said the Philippines has roughly 45 days of fuel supply at current consumption levels. The country imports 98% of its oil from the Gulf, and Filipino consumers have already endured multiple fuel price hikes over the past 3 weeks. The price of diesel and petrol has more than doubled since the war broke out. In the executive order, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. cited an imminent danger to the country's energy supply, saying the declaration would give the government the legal authority to impose measures to ensure energy stability and protect the broader economy. A committee has been formed to oversee the orderly distribution of fuel, food, medicines, and other essential goods. The government has also been empowered to directly purchase fuel and petroleum products to shore up supplies. And that's the world today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joker Rogers.